Hi everyone, I wanted to try to finish explaining the pattern that I talked about in my last video that I believe I've discovered concerning the Jubilees. And just as a recap, I'll show you how that pattern works out. If you start out with the year 5777 and you go backwards and subtract 50 years, you see that it alternates between the numbers 27 and 77 every time you subtract 50 years. So the Jubilee year always has to be either year 27 or 77. And so what I want to do in this video is I want to show you the importance of these two numbers, of the numbers 27 and 77, but in particular the number 27 and its importance in the scriptures. And this all goes back to Daniel 9:27, and I had talked about in my last video how I don't believe it's by accident that this key scripture right here concerning the end times comes up in verse 27. And the reason why this is really important, and what actually led to this recently, is a comment that was made by Diana, Jesus' servant, which is this one right here, where she had a vision of being in Israel, and in her vision she heard Prime Minister Netanyahu saying loudly, "Judah is falling, Judah is falling." And after she had received this vision, she had prayed about it, and the Lord took her to the book of Jeremiah. And then shortly after that, she watched a video by Anne Graham Lotz that also spoke of the book of Jeremiah and the destruction of Judah, and she said it was a warning to America. And what happened after that is I had pulled up a summary of the book of Jeremiah, and one of the things that's mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, I can't seem to find that particular website that I had looked at that gave the summary, but one of the points that it made in the summary is that there would be an end of the 70 years of Babylonian captivity that's spoken of in the book of Jeremiah. And so I was searching for that particular website this morning and I couldn't find it, but I found this one, which is really even better because this is making the same point that I had tried to make in my video, and I'll just show you that video in just a second. It would be this one right here where I said, is the Babylon UN rule of Judah, Palestine, Israel about to end? And in this video, I had made the premise that the 70 years of captivity would be a parallel to the 70 years since Resolution 181, because the governing body would have been the UN, and the UN is what would fulfill the description of modern day Babylon. And the reason this is important is because if you go over here to the date of the resolution, which was November 29th, 1947, as you see right here, it says the United Nations General Assembly approves the partition plan for Palestine put forward by the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. But if you go back a few months to August 31st, 1947, you see that the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine issued its report, which recommends unanimously, all 11 member states voting in favor, that Great Britain terminate their mandate for Palestine and grant it independence at the earliest possible date. So the resolution was based on the report by the special committee, and the special committee gave its report on August 31st. So when you plug in the August 31st date into the converter, you see that it comes up with year 5707. So this would be a year 7. And in fact, if you were to take out the 0, it would make it year 77, which would fit in with the pattern, even though this was not a Jubilee year. And the reason why this is important is because this ties in to the prophecy in the book of Daniel. As it says right here in this article, it says the 70 weeks prophecy is found in the later portion of Daniel chapter 9. But in the opening verses of this chapter, we are introduced to a period of just 70 years. This period, we are informed, is spoken of by the prophet Jeremiah. And over here it gives you the first 2 verses in the book of Daniel, and it says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of the Medes, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord given through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish the 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. And so if you add the 70 years to the 5707, you see that brings us to 5777, which is this Hebrew year that we're in right now. And the month is really not that important, because one of the things that I've noticed about, or at least I noticed this several years ago about the book of Daniel, and have understood this for a long time, that this prophecy is based on years, not days. That's actually one of the first things that got me started in studying the prophecy in the book of Daniel. And I just pulled this article up as an illustration, but what happened is years ago, I had repeated what gets repeated very often about how there's a prophecy in the book of Daniel that predicts the coming of the Messiah to the exact day. I know you've all heard that before, that it's that it works out to the exact day of Palm Sunday. And I had repeated that as well, at least a couple of times. And then after about the second time I repeated that, I thought maybe I should go back and try to do the math and verify it before I repeat that again to make sure it's accurate. And what happened is that it only took me a couple of seconds to realize that there was no way I could possibly calculate that, not even with a calculator, because what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to know the exact dates of the leap years or leap months if you're working in the Hebrew calendar, but then you also need to adjust for the calendar changes, because the calendar had changed from the Julian to the Gregorian, and I believe there was changes in the Hebrew calendar as well when the Hillel calendar was first developed. There was another calendar before that, so I believe you would have the same problem with the Hebrew calendar as well. So this is not something that anyone could figure out manually, but even if they could, it does not work out to Palm Sunday, because Sir Robert Anderson's calculations were actually in error, and I believe the reason for the error is because he neglected to adjust for the calendar change. So it doesn't actually work out to Palm Sunday, and so therefore that theory is invalid. But what does work is the command to restore Jerusalem that is recorded in the book of Ezra in chapter 7, and I don't think it's by accident that it's in chapter 7, because this is all about Shavuos. It's all about the number 7. Okay, so when you subtract the date of the command recorded in the book of Ezra, which was in 457 BC, and again, I don't think it's an accident that it ends with the number 7, because like I said, I believe this is all about sevens. But when you subtract that from the 483 years, you get the number 26, but you need to add 1 because there was no year 0, And so that brings you to 27 AD, which would have been the coming of the Messiah. The year that Jesus came as Messiah would have been the year 27 AD. And so that's why I don't think it's by accident that this comes up in verse 27, where it talks about the coming of the Messiah. This is talking about the first coming as well as the second coming, which together form the total of the 70th week. But there's something else really amazing that works out in this prophecy that I want to show you, and it has to do with the Jubilees, because there's a number of ways that you can decipher this prophecy. The 70 weeks, it could be referring to years, as I said earlier. It could be referring to the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, the 70 years since the Resolution 181, and it could be referring, alternatively, it could be referring to Jubilees, which is what I want to talk about next. And that's also something that's mentioned here in this article that I just found this morning. They're also talking about the aspect of the Jubilees as well. And if you multiply the number 70 times 50, you come up with 3,500 years. As it states right here, are the 70-year prophecies reflecting the time required to mark the passing of the 3,500 years. When one considers the period of 3,500 years represents the full quota of time associated with the passing of the 70 Jubilee years, a Jubilee year occurs every 50 years, there does seem to be a strong possibility that a correlation is being implied. So they're making the same premise over here, that the 70 weeks could be referring to Jubilees. And I just want to show you something that I had discovered years ago that I think is really amazing. And I talk about it over here. This is something I had shared with someone in my private messages years ago when I used to go on a debate forum and debate things like Daniel 9:27. I debated that for years, actually. That was like my pet project, was to debate Daniel 9:27. That's what most of my posts were about. But this was just a private message that I had shared some information with someone, and I never really looked back at this for years until recently, and I realized how amazing this was, and I don't really have time to get into the details of it in this video. I'll have to do another part to get into that, so I'll just get to the crux of the matter, and that is that if you go back the 3,500 years, which would be the full 70 Jubilees, it actually takes you to the year 1484 BC, which would have been the time of the Exodus, which would be the beginning of the prophecy. And that may not mean much when you look at it in Gregorian years, but when you convert it to the Hebrew year, and over here I had to put in August because we have the same situation that we did with the UN resolution. If you put in November, it takes you to year 8. So I went back to the month of August, and you see that it takes you to the Hebrew year 2277, which is actually like the number 27 amplified. And you can see that it works out with the calculator as well. When you put in the year 5777 and you subtract the 3,500 years, it takes you to the year 2277. So again, that fits in with the pattern. And what I want to do in the next video is I want to share some more really interesting information about the number 27, and especially how it relates to the Bible. Because as I had explained in my last video, there's a number of verses that come up that speak of the Son of Man that come up in verse 27. But there's some more interesting things about the Bible that I wanted to share concerning the number 27, but I'll have to do that in the next video. Thanks.